On the other hand, oh, on the other hand, when negation is associated with focus slash associate assertion, negation takes scope over universal quantifier that is not all. The number of magnolia that will bloom is not all. At the same time, it is reported that sentence-ending intonation contour disambiguate interpretations, namely, falling intonation corresponds to all not, while fall rise intonation corresponds to not all interpretations. So I guess the relevant reading, all the magnolias won't bloom, sentence ending goes down. The other interpretation is all the magnolias won't bloom, so sentence goes and up, goes down and up. Next page, please. However, Surratt et al. Are the first one to systematically investigate the relationship between sentence ending contours and interpretations. They found that falling contour was not a reliable indicator of meaning. Instead, they discovered that final word length was relevant variable. For example, longer final word corresponds to or not interpretation. Next page, please. So in this presentation, our interest is prosodic cues can disambiguate ambiguous sentences. What about gestural cues? And our broad research question is, to what extent do audio versus audiovisual cues facilitate communication and interpretation of ambiguous sentence in English? Right, Amanda, thank you.
And so actually this is how Masaaki and I got started on this, because Masaaki was presenting some prosodic work in Japanese in this area, and I happened to be in the audience. He was visiting Syracuse University at the time, and I was in the audience, and it occurred to me, well, what about gestural cues? And so we got talking, and then was that back in 2018, Masaaki? 17, 18, around then, maybe. Yeah, so we haven't stopped talking since then. But what on earth were we thinking? Because doing this work at the sentence level is such a nightmare. So that's why what we're doing here mainly is presenting the challenges of investigating prosody and gesture in ambiguity at the sentence level, in production and also in comprehension. So we're going to start with a few issues of language production. So, the frequency of these types of sentences in natural language discourse is quite rare, because ambiguity might be avoided by speakers for pragmatic reasons. So, for the Gricean maxim of manner asks speakers to be clear, and these sentences are inherently ambiguous. So, gathering a corpus of these sentences is hard, but then going that step further to gather a multimodal corpus to facilitate analyses of prosody and gesture is perhaps impossible. Okay, so what do we do about this? Okay, we do a lab study. That sounds fair enough. And here we have some wonderful stimuli that were put together by Surratt and colleagues for their comprehension and production study. And you can see the first sentence, all the magnolias won't bloom, which we've just seen. And the two following sentences after each type of ambiguity are disambiguating questions, or disambiguating sentences. So you can have all the magnolias won't bloom, which could be followed by, but I bet the ones on the south side will, or they'll just have to wait until next year. And these indicate two different meanings. You can have proportional quantifiers with negation. For example, Liam doesn't know many alumni, but the ones he does know have deep pockets, or he won't be able to bring in a lot of money. Those were the two types of sentences that we've been focusing on in our publication, is the quantifier. But increasingly, we're also focusing on other types of ambiguity. For example, the focus sensitive even. So she even painted the garage, which could be followed by she has run out of things to paint. Or there isn't anything left to do in the garage, depending on if you're emphasizing painting or garage. The focus sensitive only, Mary only ran 1 mile. She was supposed to run more, or she was supposed to swim and bike, depending on whether the emphasis is on running or 1 mile. And then because with negation, she's not singing because she's preparing for an audition. She's resting her voice, or she just likes to sing. So we can run a lab study with these sentences that, and indeed that is what Surette did to investigate the prosody of these sentences, um, which which worked fairly well, although you can see that the initial hypothesis of the falling intonational contour or the falling rising contour for quantifiers, uh, that hypothesis was not support the data did not support that hypothesis, but instead the final word lengthening emerged as a relevant indicator of meaning. The problem here is how do we investigate gesture in this type of situation? So if we ask speakers to read something, they just don't gesture. So here is one of our speakers reading something, and you can see they're holding a paper to read with one hand. They do have another hand free to gesture, but they just don't gesture, largely because they're reading.
All the magnolias won't bloom. We'll just have to wait till next year.
And so he's fiddling with the paper. We also have looked at what happens when you use a teleprompter instead of paper, and it doesn't increase the gesture rate. So the difficulty here is when in the prosody studies, when you're asking participants to read the whole text here and then follow with the target sentence to ensure a natural prosody, if you ask speakers to do that and hope to look at gesture, speakers just won't gesture while they're doing that. So
all the magnolias won't bloom.
What
we'll
was
just
our
have to wait till next year.
What was our way of addressing this challenge? Well, first of all, we asked our participants to read all the disambiguating context and then the target sentences, and then complete a comprehension test to make sure they understand the ambiguity. And then we asked them to return one by one to the disambiguating context and memorize those target sentences. And then we asked them to deliver the target sentences to a camera and specifically as expressively as possible. We told them that we were creating materials to be used in a second language test of comprehension for ambiguous sentences, which we did do. We did actually do this study as well. And so this is what happens. These are the same two individuals. And here he is reading.
All the magnolias won't bloom. We'll just have to wait till next year.
So you see very few, almost no gestures there. I have covered up his face for reasons of confidentiality. And that is important because actually head gestures emerge as very relevant in this study. Oops. Here is the same speaker when we asked him to memorize that target sentence and just deliver that target sentence. Oops.
All the magnolias won't bloom.
So you can see he's producing a gesture there with his left hand.
All the magnolias won't bloom.
And so even though he had his left hand available in the prior situation, he didn't gesture in that situation when he was reading.
All the magnolias won't bloom. We'll just have.
Okay, so this enabled us to do our study that was published in 2019, where we examined 25 native English speakers producing these scripted stimuli. And what we found there was that when the quantifier took scope over negation, so all not, so no magnolias bloom, something like that, head gestures dominated in this corpus. We had both semantic shakes and also prosodic beats. We found, like Surette and colleagues found word length to be a contributing cue to meaning. We found gesture length to be a contributing cue to meaning. So in this situation, in line with the prior Surette findings, we found gestures were significantly longer for this context. And in the other context, head gestures were also present and dominated, but the gestures were significantly shorter. So this is what it looked like. On the left side here, you see that all not context, so no magnolias bloomed. You're going to see a longer head shake going on here.
All the moms didn't allow eyeliner.
You'll also see a shoulder shrug there, which we did not code for. This work, as you all know, is extraordinarily labor intensive, especially if you're, and even more if you're dealing with the sentence level. So we looked at hand gestures and head movements. We didn't look at shoulder shrugs, but there is certainly one there. I'll play it again if I can. Yep.
All the moms didn't allow eyeliner.
Conversely, this is the not all context where some of the magnolias bloomed. Oh, keep losing.
All the moms didn't allow eyeliner.
So you can see other cues going on there, the eyebrow raising, but certainly a much shorter head shake there. So we were able to use that methodology of delivering the memorized sentences to produce that initial publication. But another challenge comes from then, which is really the focus of this group, relating prosody to gesture. And this is an area that we actually haven't been able to make a lot of progress on. Gesture is highly individually variable, and especially at the sentence level. So not everybody gestures in the same way to disambiguate meaning. And we've also seen from the Surrett study that prosody is highly individually variable, and not everybody uses prosody in the same way. So obtaining sufficient data to enable robust quantitative analyses for generalizable findings relating one phenomenon with high individual variation to another phenomenon with high individual variation at the sentence level is just a nightmare. And we actually haven't really managed to succeed with this, with the data set with the data set as with the production data set. So we're still working on ways to do that. Moving to comprehension, instead of kind of banging our heads against the wall with production, we have moved to comprehension. And the challenge here is the ecological validity of the stimuli. So what do you do? How do you generate stimuli when the production patterns are so variable? So we did what some other researchers have done. We did our production study. We found the kind of fairly generalizable patterns in the production study, and then we use those production patterns to inform our stimulus rendering. So this is me producing, to the best of my ability, a longer head shake for the all not context. All the magnolias won't bloom. And you can see there's also emotion expressed on my face there, which is another issue, the issue of emotion that Masaaki and I are thinking about, which is another complexity that we haven't raised here yet. So, okay, you can address the challenge of the ecological validity of stimuli by using your production patterns to script your stimulus. And then another challenge that we have found is the effect of task structure on our results. So when you're trying to measure participant understandings of specific interpretations of ambiguous sentences, you can either present the target sentence with a context and then test for renderings that match that context or don't. Or you can present the target sentence only and ask listeners to interpret that sentence. And we have done both in our most recent work. So in the first task structure, we presented participants with the context, and then we showed them the target sentence, minus the little all not here. We showed them the target sentence. And then for those participants in an audio condition, we asked them to select between one of two renderings that match that context. So here's the first one. All the magnolias won't bloom. And the second one. All the magnolias won't bloom. So those were participants in an audio condition. For participants in an audio-visual condition, we asked them to choose all the magnolias won't bloom versus all the magnolias won't bloom. And then finally, for those in a visual condition, we ask them to choose one or the other. And for this particular context, the all not, the correct answers were all the ones on the right. In a different task structure, with a different group of participants, we gave no presentation of context. We just provided them with a target sentence, and then we asked them which sentence would naturally follow. So an audio condition, they heard something like this. All the magnolias won't bloom. And they had to decide, they had to interpret that sentence and then decide, will it be A that follows or B that follows? All the magnolias won't bloom. So the answer in each case is B in the first one and A is in the second one. So the first one is some of the magnolias will bloom, and the second one is none of the magnolias will bloom. And similarly for the audiovisual condition, and you've already seen these, but they had to do the same thing, decide which sentence would naturally follow. So this is a sentence interpreting decision. This is an excerpt of our results from task 1 and task 2. So in task 1, we actually had 3 conditions, the audiovisual, and visual only. We dropped the visual only condition for task 2, which asked participants to interpret the sentence because the visual condition in orange on the right was not, on the left was not doing so well. Participants find this a little bit hard. And we thought that we really wanted to tease the difference between audio and audiovisual apart. So we focused on that difference in our task 2. And you may notice there's some difference in the results here, but we'll come back to that in the discussion questions. So we are ready to move on to discussion, if that's okay.
Okay, so one of our first questions is, are there alternatives to delivering target sentences to camera as explicitly as possible, purportedly to create materials for L2 component test, a comprehension test? So that was the instruction we had for our participants so that we can get a natural production of gestures from the audience. Any suggestions or discussion on this point? It is, as Amanda showed earlier videos, it is sometimes hard for us to elicit gestures from audience participants, because if they hold script, they don't gesture, then we have them to memorize target sentence one at a time and look at the camera, and they know that their productions are used for L2 comprehension tasks. So they wanted to convey intended interpretation as explicitly as possible. But we are wondering there will be other ways to get gestures from participants.
I think, Masaki, we can combine this with questions 2A and 2B because they're
Yeah.
all around the same sort of topic. So, you know, we've seen that when we're asking participants to deliver a memorized sentence to a video, they gesture less often than they do in their normal day-to-day conversation. So the gesturing rate goes down. And what we're also seeing is the predominance of head gestures here. And we're not sure if that is because of the task itself with the memorized sentences, or if it's an artifact, or if it's an artifact of the task, or if it's related to disambiguation of ambiguous sentences. So there's also the possibility of instructing participants to gesture. Some studies have done this, and then some studies have gone the route we went, which is be as expressive as you can, but without actually asking people to gesture. And that's related to whether there is an impact of an instruction to gesture on gesture production. And there are findings that go either way on this. So Lee and Kravota found an impact on, so Lee found an impact on the type of the axis that gestures were produced on, whether gestures were encouraged or not, or whether participants were explicitly told to gesture or not. And Kravota found that when participants were instructed to gesture, of course they did, but this also impacted the structure of the discourse, the spoken discourse, in terms of length, length and prosody. And there are also other findings to show that when we physiologically produce a gesture, that will also affect our prosody. So instructing people to gesture does, according to these studies, does have some impact on production patterns. But then Parel and colleagues did a study where they asked individuals, they didn't give any specific instruction to individuals in three types of task. And then with the same individuals, they gave an instruction to gesture, and they didn't find any difference between the two. So there are some mixed findings here. And so I think questions 1, 2A, and 2B are all related. Just the difficulty of working with scripted sentences when we know participants don't gesture when they read, and the gesture rate kind of goes down in this type of situation. So what does anybody think about that?
So as Amanda mentioned, one of the challenges is like a pragmatic constraint in a way. We don't usually say ambiguous sentence in day-to-day conversation. So that may be another factor for people to naturally produce gesture one over the other, unlike like a reference tracking.
Yeah, that's true.
Okay, would you like to open the discussion now, and we maybe leave like question 3 to the side for the moment? So yeah,
Sure. Yeah.
yeah. I think by the looks of it, Patrick has a contribution to make. Hello.